Alrighty, so let's get started. So, good morning, everybody, and welcome to part 8 of our Changes in Claims series. Today, I'll be going through with you acceleration and mitigation and project delays, analyzing them, distinguishing between both of them, and I'll go over a short outline, just a little bit of why this is important, why we're learning it, and what we'll go over today. Kai is also here, so she will also be available to answer any of your questions as well as we go through, and we'll chime in as well. So with that, I'm going to get started with a recap of what we've done so far. So we first talked about notifications of all the changes in claims. We brought up a infographic of the notification, the timeline for all of that, guideline, and what the H.dot specifications say. That will also come up again in this training today as we're relating back to that often, as that is always the starting point of the documentation for these changes in claims. So we'll reference it again, we'll go over it again. And then after that was differing site conditions. So we went over differing site condition claims, differing site conditions in the field. We went over checklists for that, available to you on ACC. And then we went over application of both of the first two concepts. So we went over some examples. Then contract interpretation, went over how to interpret various different scenarios in contracts, interpreting H.dot contracts. Then delay tracking, documentation, best practices, and we will also, this is a theme throughout all of our classes, documentation is of the utmost importance, and we'll emphasize that again today. But throughout the rest of the trainings, there will also be more emphasis on that, as we want to make sure that we're doing that always on all of our projects. And we'll go through best practices, go through how we want certain things formatted. But again, at the end of the presentation, we'll go over what's left in this series and what to look forward to. So, and then we got into schedules. So last two trainings, I know Joel's on as well. So thank you, Joel. If you do have any questions about baseline schedule reviews or delay tracking through CPM schedule reviews, Joel is online as well. So if we have more questions for there, Joel will be able to answer those. So thanks, Joel, for joining. And that is a recap of the changes in claim series so far. So now we're going on to part 8. So before we go into mitigation and acceleration, I just want to provide a reminder as we're developing dashboards for schedules, or we have already developed one, and the higher ups will, the goal is for them to be looking at these dashboards. So it feeds the information that you input into ACC to those dashboards, and the important dates are those that are here. So obviously, I just want to emphasize them: notice to proceed, start work, pre-final inspection, final inspection, contractual completion, and substantial completion. So we want to be tracking those dates at all times, and want to make sure that on our schedules that we're reviewing in submittals and importing into ACC schedules, schedule module, that all of the schedules have these dates and it is outlined accordingly in the field or the category of on your schedule. So we want to make sure that these dates are absolutely clear. So whether we're reviewing a baseline schedule or a progress schedule, we want to make sure that these dates are clear and that we're uploading these to Autodesk Construction Cloud as the information will feed into a dashboard that the higher ups will be reading. So just wanted to emphasize that and give a reminder from the last two trainings. So with that, we'll get into the training today. So the first concept we'll be going over is understanding mitigation, understanding definitions of mitigation and acceleration, and then also understanding the differences between the two. And then we'll talk about some mitigation strategies and different types of acceleration, and in particular, one that we want to focus on that we see often, and we'll provide an example for it, is constructive acceleration. So some of the legal framework that goes into that, and legal framework around that, so that we can prepare, we as H.dot can prepare responses and and two notifications, things like that, that are prompt and accurate, and we don't avoid certain things that could become claims later. So we'll get into that. And then acceleration, planning, and execution. And then it all ties into claim preparation and risk management. So that is kind of ties to the whole point of this changes in claim series to be able to recognize, notify, and analyze claims accordingly. So we'll get a little bit into that, how it relates to claim preparation and risk management. And then a problem that we often see on our projects are subcontractor delays. So how to analyze that as a delay, mitigation, acceleration, all of that. And then finally, quantifying acceleration costs. We'll go over some of that. And then we have a few examples, a few short examples going over distinguishing between mitigation and acceleration in the delays and moving forward. But yeah, so at the very end, we'll have bigger examples that tie everything together, but that will be later on throughout the training. But for now, we have short examples of what we're learning today. So with that, I'll get started. So understanding mitigation versus acceleration. So what is mitigation? And mitigation is contractors' actions to reduce or avoid delay impacts without incurring additional costs, such, for example, resequencing work or executing tasks concurrently. So contractor is mitigating the impact by doing things such as resequencing work or executing tasks concurrently instead of in sequence, right? So that's mitigation. And then acceleration. So contractor incurs additional costs to increase labor, equipment, or shifts in order to recover lost time or meet an earlier deadline. And that earlier deadline can potentially be set internally by the contractor, or it could be an owner directive. So that's why, as it says below there, mitigation may be preferable and is preferable on the owner side when delays are minor in owner costs. So sometimes it is owner cause acceleration, owner cause mitigation, but often the contractors will try and twist it to an owner directed acceleration. So they're entitled, so then they would be entitled to cost, right? And that is what we see often on our claims, where they are saying that this delay was due to an owner directive. And so the contractor was then forced to accelerate their work, in turn, double the labor costs, all these other factors. And so that is what often happens. So understanding what is mitigation versus what is acceleration, and the contractor has a duty to mitigate the delay as much as possible without turning it into an acceleration. So those are the definitions and comparing back and forth. So some mitigation strategies, as I previously discussed, there are some techniques that the contractor can do. So resequencing work, performing tasks concurrently. And again, this ties back to the scheduling training that we had previously. So making sure that they're laying out all of their tasks and making sure that on their baseline schedule, if you have any questions about efficiency or any of the tasks and the critical path, that we make sure that we get those questions out and deal with that at the beginning on the beginning of the project, instead of dealing with it later on in the project. So some techniques for sequencing work, performing tasks concurrently, and also, as I said, the critical path, redirecting resources to the critical path to ensure that the project is moving on schedule. So those are some of the mitigation strategies that the contractors can use. So as I said previously, the contractors are obligated to mitigate delays when it does not materially affect cost or schedule logic. So now, highlighted materially, because we've seen this before. We've discussed definition of materially affect, materially different, and want to reference and ask the group, does anyone remember what materially different ties to? What class we talked about this before, please type it in the chat. If you remember what class we talked about materially different. I'm just opening up the chat. So yes, good morning, Charmaine. If somebody can put in the chat which class we talked about materially different. Awesome, Charmaine. Yes, differing site conditions. So what is material? Yep. So I will get through that. Yep. So we talked about materially different. And yes, Charmaine, it ties to the class of differing site condition. But what is materially different? Someone please put it in the chat. Not for the contractor specs. Yep. So material different refers to a difference that is substantially compared to what was reasonably expected or in the contract, represented in the contract document. So yes, Charmaine. So in differing site conditions, conditions are materially different if they are beyond what the contractor could have anticipated based on the contracts, plans, specs, or the typical industry conditions or typical conditions of the site, right? So that is materially different. But now we're talking about here today, materially affect. So legal duty to mitigate, contractors are obligated to mitigate delays. Oh, yes, Kai put it in there. Material important, significant, or consequential enough that it could influence decision. Different, not the same, change or alter. So that is the literal definition. So significantly or substantially different in a way that could affect the decision or outcome. Yes. So building off of that, materially affect means a change or impact that is significant enough to alter the outcome of a project. So not just a minor inconvenience. So, I mean, in a schedule, materially affects the critical path. That would mean that it would extend the critical path. If it materially affects the critical path, it will extend project completion, not just a small shift in, let's say, a non-critical path activity. So that would be material, that would be affected material. So that is the difference. We've talked about two different things: material difference, material effect. So just wanted to emphasize that. If there are any more questions? Yeah, and that's important. Thank you, Kai. Usually measured by a reasonable standard. So want to be sure that this is can be interpreted by a reasonable person, and that is not skewed. Okay, so what HDOT can do. So although it's not required, you can encourage submission of mitigation plans. So how, if something happened that changes the timeline, the contractor, you can have the contractor show how they plan to mitigate and get the project back on schedule. So, as I said before, in mitigation strategies, they can try and explain how they're going to mitigate using those strategies to you and to the project. And that just helps with documentation, right? Because this whole series, we're talking about documentation, documentation early and not later on when it comes to projects, proactive documentation, because then later, if there's a claim that shows up, then you will have sufficient documentation to say that, hey, you were the one that submitted, here's the mitigation, here was your plan. Why did the plan not go according to that? So then this was supposed to be mitigated. It wasn't owner caused acceleration, and there was XYZ cost, and it affected the critical path. You could resequence some of these activities that don't affect the critical path. So yeah, wrapping up this page, these are some of the mitigation strategies. Going back to the presentation. So now we talk about acceleration. So now we get into cost, right? So there are a few different types of acceleration, and the first is voluntary acceleration. So contractors accelerate at their own cost. to reduce overhead or earn early completion incentives. So this happens sometimes, right? Throughout the project, but a lot of times, the contractors will argue against voluntary acceleration and say that it is the next type, which is directed accelerations, where owner or HDOT in this case will issue a formal directive requiring the contractor to accelerate. So this is something that we do want to document, right? Because I mean, obviously, whenever we're doing documentation, we want to be fair, right? So we want to obviously document the delays that are caused by HDOT as well, so that we have reasonableness when we are negotiating, and if it does get taken to court, right? But then moving forward, one of the most common and one of the types that we want to highlight here today is constructive acceleration. So this is when the contractor requests a time extension due to an excusable delay in this scenario, but the owner denies the extension. So they request and they notify, but the owner denies the extension, but expects on-time completion. So keeping the time substantial completion same date, but the contractor has an excusable delay. So imposing implicit pressure to accelerate. So that would mean that the contractor would then incur cost, and there is implicit pressure to accelerate, even though the owner is not saying that it is a owner directive acceleration. So just a note here to tie up these acceleration types to avoid some of these claims up front. We always want to emphasize we must respond to time extension requests, and well, not only time extension requests, but any change request or notification claim. We want to respond, and it is of the utmost importance to respond promptly and in writing. So promptly, accurately, and in writing. So with that, I'm going to tie this back to the quick notification reference guide that we've been referencing again and again and again over in this changes in claim series. If you don't get anything from this series, please remember this infographic. It is available to everybody on the wiki site. It is on all of these slide decks in all the trainings that we're doing thus far. But this outlines what's in the specs per the change type, right? And how long that we or the contractor has to make their notification of potential claim, for us to respond to the notification, and then for the contractor to claim. Now, if these expectations are not met, then it is right for rejection, and that is something that obviously we're going through on a lot of the project claims that we've been dealing with now for HSHOT. So we just want to make sure that you have this information out here. It's spelled. It is really of the utmost importance to follow this, and even more so, wanted to highlight this section. I know it may be a little bit small, but go back. We'll provide the slide decks, and but the claim shall at minimum should contain all of the following here in what you can see on this screen. So if it doesn't contain this, then it can be deemed for a rejection, right? So I want to make sure that it's detailed description of the facts and circumstances, the specific provisions of the contract or laws which support the claim, and statement of the reasons why provisions support this claim. Copy of the notice, right? That is very important. Any other documents, references. In most cases, when they're submitting claims, it's really, really, really big documents, or really large documents, right? So all of those documents will be towards the bottom as references. If an adjustment of time for the performance of the contract is sought, they need this information. And if cost is sought, if additional cost, then all of that should be followed. So I want to make sure that we follow this guide, follow this infographic, and this information is readily available to you folks here. Okay, so getting back to constructive acceleration, we'll talk a little bit about the legal framework in the constructive acceleration type. So some elements to think about when contractor is potentially submitting a claim and what they need. So they need an excusable delay that exists. Obviously, the contractor should have notified us, right? H dot, so the owner should be aware of this delay. And H dot should have failed to act reasonably on a time extension request. So we talked about that initially. The owner insists on the original completion date, so no time extension, right? But the contractor had to accelerate because they had to meet that the same time. The contractor incurs additional costs to meet the unchanged schedule, so they had to work around their schedule, incur additional costs to meet that date, the contract date. So just, I mean, a reference here, this key case law, and it showed that even implicit pressure from the owner may constitute a directive to accelerate. So even though you reject a notification of potential claim, you may generate implicit pressure. So with that being said, on our end, some tips, we need to document all communications clearly. That's why we're emphasizing the use of correspondence. Instead of just emailing everything, because it's easier to sort by type. It's easier to have in a shared environment where everybody will have access. And in fact, correspondence, you can control the permission level as to which person sees what type of correspondence. And we'll get into more training of both correspondence and issues later on with specific formatting, with specific types. But the tip here to avoid, or not to avoid, but to have better documentation here is to make sure that we have all of our documentation in order, and through using the construction tools and just normal communications, we want to document all of that. So and then finally, avoid language that could be interpreted as an acceleration order without proper authorization. So sometimes, right, when we're making directives, we just have to be careful with what we're telling the contractor, because they could interpret it as a acceleration directive, and want to make sure, and that goes back to the first point, right? Making sure that we're documenting what we're actually saying, so that we can go back to what we said and go back to what they said, so that if they claim later on, that we have the documentation available. Okay. So now we'll talk about some acceleration planning and execution when we're talking about acceleration types. So some strategies that can be utilized is to analyze schedule delays with focus on critical path. So I'm not going to get too much into detail as the previous training 2 weeks ago with Joel was about CPM schedules, analyzing that. So I know that we've learned this. So contractor can add shifts, labor crews, equipment, coordinate tightly with contractor. This is some acceleration strategies that the contractor could and often does utilize. But then with acceleration comes costs. So that comes with overtime labor, lost productivity, and inefficiencies when they have to accelerate, added supervision, expedited materials, potential for rework. So all of these things are going to be in the potential cost justification for the acceleration that is incurred. And if it's directed by the HSHOT team, then that'll be what is considered in your cost justifications when you're writing a change order. So these are some of the elements that, not all, but some of the elements that come with acceleration strategy and cost consideration for the contractor. So one of the keywords that we've been utilizing, cost loaded schedules, and I guess more to come on that, but that is something that would obviously be extremely helpful when we're analyzing and reviewing schedules and productivity. But in training in the next couple of weeks, we'll get a little bit more into productivity, loss of productivity, analyzing productivity claims. So I don't want to get too much into detail on that, but The second part of that is real-time notification and acceleration related costs. So making sure, again, we're tracking, analyzing the notification, and so on. So next is claim preparation and risk management. So again, tying back into claim preparation and managing the risks that comes along with potential claims that will happen. So documentation requirement. So I keep on harping on documentation. So maintaining detailed records of labor, schedule updates, and cost impacts. Provide written notice of added costs and seek written acknowledgement from HDOT. So that is on the contractor's end, right? They need to provide this notification and written response from the engineer. So that is of the utmost importance. The second is legal risks. So claims may be denied if contractors fail to reserve the rights in writing. So claims obviously may be denied if they don't provide, or are probably going to be denied if they don't provide the necessary notification. Harped on this, harped on this, harped on this. Courts may reject acceleration claims without baseline and updated schedules. So obviously they have to prove with documentation, and that comes along with schedules. And that's why we spent 2 classes, maybe 3, we'll see, 2 classes on reviewing schedules, reviewing baseline schedules, reviewing progress schedules, reviewing the CPM schedule as a whole, end of project schedule delay. We spent some time on that so that you folks can be best prepared to analyze, review these schedules, because we know that the contractors are, and when they provide that schedule information with the baseline and updated schedules, we don't want that to be a surprise to you all when they submit a claim for it. They obviously have to be submitting it on a timely basis. They have to submit their baseline schedule. They have to submit their progress schedules. We have to make sure that we're reviewing that on a weekly basis with their 3-week schedules, and then also on a monthly basis with those overall CPM schedules. And again, don't want to go into too much detail, but that is of the utmost importance when courts are reviewing claims, is looking at the schedule, baseline schedules, progress schedules, and we'll determining what is fair. And then finally, some best practices. So making sure that we're enforcing delay and cost notification procedures as we have in the infographic shown previously. And then most importantly, requiring contemporaneous documentation. Now, what is contemporaneous documentation? That is documentation created at the same time the event occurs, not after the fact, right? That is super important. And why does that matter? Why is it important? It's because it'll provide accuracy, so details will fade quickly. So making sure that we're documenting on the spot will reduce errors or selective memory for people. And often, right, we see on projects, sometimes the project management teams will change, and sometimes these claims are submitted later. So making sure that we have documentation at the time of when it happens, it provides credibility, it provides transparency, and when we're defending against claims, HDOT can point to these contemporaneous records to show what actually happened, right? So that is a definition of contemporaneous, and just wanted to highlight that here, making sure that we're keeping track of it, making sure we're keeping track of these delays, accelerations, mitigations, real time, and documenting them. Okay, now let's get a little bit into subcontractor delays, and obviously this is this happens often on projects, right, where prime contractors will blame subcontractors, and they'll have delays because of their subcontractors. But the bottom line is prime contractors are responsible for managing subcontractor performance, bottom line. So courts may deny recovery and some of the recovery and mitigation plans if the contractor fails to control sub-cause delays. So I guess what to take from this slide is that the prime contractors are responsible, and it's up to the prime contractor to manage the subcontractor performance and manage any of the delays that are caused because of their subcontractors. So if their delays are caused by their subcontractors and not owner directed, they need to provide strategies, and they need to think about ways to mitigate, and not say that it's an owner directive acceleration, or not say that they had to accelerate based off of a subcontractor delay. That is something that they have to manage. So on our end, making sure that we're evaluating, the contractor, subcontractor, seeing the relationship, seeing how, if it's a subcontractor delay, recognizing that it's a subcontractor delay, and then requiring the notice of all subcontractors. So making sure that they're documenting it, and making sure that we're documenting subcontractor delays, and that we can tell the difference. And ultimately, it is up to the prime contractor to manage yourself. So I don't think there's much more to that. And then finally, we have quantifying acceleration costs. So it's something that the baseline requires. So how many of you are doing this? So as I'm going through these points, we want to make sure that we're doing this on our projects, and we talked about baseline schedule reviews previously. So we want to make sure that we are emphasizing doing this on our projects. So when the baseline schedule is submitted, we're making sure that we're looking for these types of things. We're analyzing, quantifying acceleration costs. So common recovery cost elements. So premium time. So often we'll see on projects when the contractor is charging overtime. When the contractor is showing that additional supervision is needed, in particular for accelerated impacts, decreased labor productivity. We want to make sure that we're analyzing all these things. We want to make sure that the labor productivity is consistent, right? We don't want there to be inconsistencies there. So we want to make sure that we're analyzing all of this, and hopefully that is at the beginning of the project and not towards the end of the project when we're analyzing claims, because at that point it's too late, right? So want to make sure that we're keeping track of all these things and that we recognize this. And then some accepted proof methods. So if somebody asks, how did you come up with this? And one of that is, I'm not sure. I know we referenced this in previous trainings, but and some of you may not call when you're doing this analysis, this measured mild analysis, but essentially all it is, that's a fancy word for comparing productivity before and after an acceleration. So taking a look at the productivity of two separate activities and seeing the difference between the two. And then the second point here is that courts will expect data-driven, credible, and consistent quantification methods when we're talking about productivity. So objective, making sure we're being objective based on actual data, not on opinions. Making sure that we're analyzing our our CPM schedules, and making sure we're analyzing those efficiencies and also inefficiencies when it comes to schedule activities and productivity. So we want to be sure that we're keeping track of this. So HDOT use case, HDOT team should be requiring the contractors to maintain labor productivity data by project phase or location. So we want to be sure that we're doing this on all of our projects. So if you're not, then please make sure that we're doing this. It's not too late. Make sure that we're analyzing these sort of things when we're reviewing our project schedules so the contractors submit. Okay. So now we'll get into some examples. First of all, does anyone have any questions before we get into some short examples? All right, let's get into some of them. So we're going to reference some examples that were previously stated on our previous trainings, just to provide consistency purposes and to build upon them. But essentially, we're just adding a little bit of a new twist to some of these examples so that we can distinguish between mitigation and acceleration. So let's go back to the Waimea 2A project, some background. Contractor discovered unsuitable subgrade during Waimea 2A, delaying roadway embankment work. But let's add a twist to this. Instead of requesting immediate time extension, the contractor proposes mitigation. So in this case, the mitigation strategy is that crews will start drainage culvert installation in unaffected areas while waiting for the soil stabilization. So the contractor proposes, you as an HDOT team can recognize this mitigation and analyze that, right? So here's some perspective. Mitigation shows good faith and keeps progress of the project moving. Owner should document this mitigation effort to avoid later disputes, right? Because contractor can come back, or perhaps sometimes will come back later and say, oh, what about this? This was something that we needed to accelerate because of you. And you'll be like, well, no, this was your mitigation strategy here. So, but why is this, the question to you folks here is, why is this mitigation and not acceleration? Please put it in the chat.
Okay, we're gonna start calling on people. Who is gonna get called on? Mitigation shows good faith, keeps progress moving. Owners should document this mitigation. So why? If you look at the schedule, you've got your baseline, you've got your mitigated, you've got your acceleration impact. Can you see it? So what does the baseline show? What are the activities? And where is the acceleration impact? Maybe it's not clear. No one? Okay, let me see. Who's the most capable person in alphabetical order? Ooh, I kind of feel like calling on Chan. Okay, I can bug the ooh, Ty, I can bug Ty. Nainoa, no input. You guys do you not see it? Is it two? And maybe this is a warm-up. Maybe this is a warm-up. Why don't you, okay, explain this, because then the rest of them have this little bar chart. So why don't you explain this one, and then the next one we'll start calling on people, and that's when everybody will start dropping off.
This is the warm-up one. It's the
Yes.
easy one. So
wait,
the
I know it's
opportunity.
gonna take one for the team. Where
Oh,
is
I know. I knew I could count on you. I know.
drainage? He said drainage. The acceleration impact is adding drainage, but drainage is concurrent with the embankment. It's concurrent with the mitigation. So they basically moved, you see the drainage blue line, right? From 18 to 25, and they moved it, right? But why is this mitigation and not acceleration, right? The activity moved up, it's concurrent. So they definitely finished it early. So basically they just worked it out, even though there was an unsuitable condition. They didn't let it affect their critical path. And in fact, they said, you know what, we can do this at the same time. So originally their baseline, they had embankment, and then they had drainage, and then they had paving. But even though there was an unsuitable condition, they said, you know what, we can do this at the same time we're doing the embankment. Maybe it's in two different areas. They were able to figure it out. You know, these are the things as construction managers or project engineers or even inspectors, whoever's in the field, when you see those kind of things that might be able to be done concurrently, and somehow they were able to do it with the same crew, right? So there was no additional cost. they were able to do activities concurrently. Maybe in the baseline, they could have done that initially. Anyway, it's not affecting, it's not moving, and they did it voluntarily. Go ahead. What's the answer? Okay, wait. We got some activity. Drainage, embankment. Chan says embankment. Justin, my baseline completion date has not changed. Would it be similar to crashing the schedule? I'm not sure what that means. You'll have to explain that, Justin. So while Cord is explaining this, go ahead, Cord. We'll monitor the chat. Yes, concurrent,
Right.
simultaneous work activities. Go.
Yeah. So, I mean, the key thing is simultaneous work activities while not incurring extra costs. So, when they incur the additional costs, that's when it turns into an acceleration. And whether that is owner directed or contractor choice, that is, up for interpretation and depending on the situation, right? So, but in this scenario, the contractor decided to do this and there was no additional costs incurred. So, mitigation.
And then I'm gonna touch on, Marvin had asked earlier, examples. Obviously there's wording that you can add, and I really feel like, well, we're gonna talk more, but I feel like we should work through real examples that people are having.
Absolutely.
I know some of these examples people see, they're like, hey, that was our project. I go, yeah, and there's one today, Marshall will recognize. But if you constantly think about notification and that infographic, that's why Cord is really harping on the infographic. Because if there is a perceived change, and it could be a constructive change, right? You give them direction and they perceive that as additional cost or a change, they have to notify you. So you should know immediately. Otherwise, they waive their right under the contract for a change. And I know this is a super hard concept, and it will be difficult to enforce until and when everyone throughout the state on every district is doing this. Because otherwise, they'll come back and say, well, it'll be the owners being inconsistent in how they're applying or interpreting the contract. So again, I think I've said this, it might take time, but harping on notification now, and that's why I know different people have different ways of approaching it in your correspondence, but anytime you're providing some kind of field order, direction, whatever, adding that, please refer to notification requirements in 104, with respect to blah, blah, blah. If there's anything here that you construe as a change, please, follow notification requirements. So within, what is it, 5 days, 3 to 5 days, you should know whether they think it's a change. If they don't, document in your, you can write another memo, document your meeting minutes. We gave you the field order, your notification period has expired. We assume this isn't a change. And again, if it's not documented, it doesn't happen. And if we have time, Marshall has a great example of where I think we did a great job in documenting, and the contractor's still coming back asking for delay. So go ahead. Hopefully that helps.
Is that this example? Okay, is that this?
Yes.
Okay, let's get to this one, because I think we only have 60
Hey,
minutes.
Kai.
I'll let you.
Kai, one thing, can I add one thing? Documentation without DOT proper documentation of all the things you just talked about. Essentially, you could look at it as we don't have a chance. With it, we have a chance. It's not guaranteed that we'll be in the right, but it's like our ticket into the next level. If we do it, we can go to the next level. If we don't do it, pretty much can't. Is one way I like to look at that.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, do you want me to do this, Cord?
Yes, please.
Okay, so, and maybe Marshall can do it, but we have an issue where we issued a field order. We issued a memo to direct the contractor to move forward because we did have a differing site condition. We acknowledge that. And through the process, which is very interesting, the contractor kind of was taking their time, and we're saying order material. Okay, we're going to order the material. What material exactly is that? Well, it's in the plan that you produced, that you gave. you should know what the material is. Oh, we're not sure what the material is. Like they were playing these little, let's not call them games. I'm not sure what to call it. There were just seem to be confusion, even though they're the ones producing the plan, which is odd, but anyway. So they didn't know what to order. They had to ask us what to order again, even though they produced the plan. And then we sent them a field order to be very clear. We're directing you to do this. Then we sent a memo to follow up because they weren't doing it. So we said, hey, we sent you a field order. We're telling you to do this, do it. Then we executed the change order telling them to do it. When we were in the field, they basically disagreed with how the force account was being calculated and they walked off the job. Now that we're in, let's say, delay, I mean, it's a little off from acceleration or mitigation, but I think the point is the contractor has a duty to mitigate the change. And their mitigation in this case was to stay on the job. Even though we have a disagreement on payment, that doesn't give you or entitle you to leave the job. Nowhere in the contract does it say, okay, if you disagree, you can demobilize. It says the opposite. So it's an interesting, really contemporaneous example right now where I feel like direction was pretty clear. Um, and the contractor is still claiming that because they voluntarily demobilized. I also believe our emails said, okay, this is your choice, your means and method. You have decided this. We will not be considering this delay. And in some aspects, if you go into, schedule, it's kind of a concurrent delay, right? The differing site is still delaying, but you walked off. So you're not entitled to cost or anything in those situations. And rather than mitigating, which there's more than one instance or change I've been involved with currently. Instead of mitigating, the contractor thinks they're entitled to costs, even when their people aren't doing anything. They haven't done, at least good faith effort. I believe in this case, and we haven't dug into it. I really think during some of those meetings they were telling us they had another job and they pulled the people to go do that job. And now they're saying they didn't have anywhere to put those people. They were pulled off the job, basically sitting around doing nothing. So why is that our responsibility? So it's stuff like that where even now where I feel like the paper trail is really, really solid, that the contractors will still come back. I don't think I see PAC on, I know Justin, you're involved with some of those. So it becomes really difficult to track when you're looking at things 1 to 2 years later because it becomes super important to make sure we have that documentation in place. So anyway, the contractor later submitted the delay claim asserting that the work stoppage and demobilization caused the delay and the additional costs. So they're asking for additional overhead for that time they voluntarily demobilized. So it just emphasizes that the contractor has to act prudently. What is a reasonable person? Is it reasonable for them to leave the job because there's disagreement on payment? No, the contract allows for you to put a notice of potential claim, follow up with your paperwork. Their recourse they're not allowed to just demobilize. So we'll see how this plays out. Obviously, at the project level, we're denying it. It'll get elevated. We'll see. And this is where management really has to support the field in making sure when we're trying to enforce the contract, they are also enforcing the contract. So, courts boards often reduce or deny claims where the contractor failed to mitigate, referencing the principle that a party cannot recover damages that could have been reasonably avoided. Again, the path there was argue about money, keep working. It wasn't demobilize. Even when we told them, when you demobilize, that's your means and methods. We're not counting this as delay. So just kind of unilateral. Was it? I can't remember if it was a unilateral change. It might have been a bilateral change, actually. But that's a good question. Even with the unilateral change, same as a field order. they're supposed to proceed as if the change was incorporated into the contract. On our side, we are supposed to execute a change order within 15 days. So if you do a field order, within 15 days, you're supposed to have a contract. In that case, they may have a case, but again, the field order language in 104 tells them to move forward as if it were part of the contract. Okay. Any questions? My Paloa. Well, and so Justin's My Paloa, I have to say, has got to be one of the worst jobs in the world. The documentation is a problem. It's hard to go back because we don't have all of that. So the whole point of ACC build and correspondence and issues and all the thing Cord's talking about that we want to roll out to you folks is to make that documentation easier, to make sure we're tagging things as changes and claims so we can extract it. You don't have to go and look through the paper file anymore. You can just tag it and pull it out. And when you do those best practices and you do a good job when it's happening, it makes everything so much easier when you're trying to settle things. Okay.
Yep. Contemporaneous document. Simultaneous. Okay, so I know we have a few more short examples, but we only have 7 minutes left. I want to get away or want to get with the key takeaways. So mitigation versus acceleration. What's the difference? Mitigation, contractor's duty when feasible and without added costs, right? Cost is a big thing there. And the contractor has a duty to mitigate when possible. Acceleration recovery actions that increase cost, right? Sometimes it's owner directed, sometimes it's contractor's choice to meet an internal deadline. So want to be able to distinguish that and analyze the difference between those subsets of acceleration. HDOT's role, so avoid creating constructive acceleration. We went over a couple slides as constructive acceleration, but by responding promptly and fairly to extension requests. Kai just talked about responding or having the contractor provide notification and responding to it within those timeframes, executing change orders, sending out field memos. Want to make sure that we're responding promptly and doing that promptly and fairly with some of these extension requests and all of those different things. Being able to distinguish between contractually required recovery versus compensated acceleration. So again, what I said previously, want to distinguish whether it's owner directed and that's a change in the contract, or whether it was in the contract, but the contractor has an internal deadline to meet, and that's why they accelerate. So want to be able to determine the difference, need to be able to document that so you can go back and reference it. Risk management, directed acceleration equals owner liability, which, and then we would issue change orders. And so we have to analyze, we as HDOT have to analyze, the cost and benefit in directing owner acceleration. So directed acceleration. Okay, key subcontractor delays remain contractor responsibility. So subcontractor delays remain the prime contractor's responsibility. And again, highlighted this here, require contemporaneous documentation. So simultaneous as the activities are happening, making sure we're documenting that there in support and when you're defending claim. Documentation is critical. We want to maintain clear communication and so that we can avoid misinterpretation and so that we can have the proper tools to defend against claims. Bottom line, timely decisions, clear directives, and standardization record keeping to reduce the risk. Effective management of mitigation and acceleration preserves project timeliness or timelines while protecting HDOT from unnecessary. So those are some of the bottom lines. But with that, I wanted to just show what we still have left. Went over acceleration mitigation today. Some of the next classes are going to be about loss of productivity claims. So mentioned that a little bit previously. Delay claim analysis. So this will be further deeper dive into analyzing delay claims. And then part 11, pricing construction changes. So how to develop ICEs with examples how to distinguish cost changes. So going over in detail some of the reasoning for how to justify cost changes. And then the last two classes are exciting. These two classes will be wrapping up. We'll be wrapping up the entire series. So these two classes will be a short recap of everything that we've done in this changes and claim series. But class 12 will be using real project examples. So we'll go over from start to end some of the problems that are occurring on projects, and then based off of this class series that we have, from start to end, from notification all the way to executing a change order, or rejecting a claim. That ties into class number 12, but issues tracking. So making sure that you're tracking the issues per the best practice through ACC issues module, tracking it in the format that can be easily interpreted by your resident, by construction engineer, by federal highways, all of these different people, making sure that we're inputting it correctly and formatted correctly so that others can see, and so that you folks as a project team can also analyze and get certain reports as best as possible. So I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything else on the next classes, but this is what is to come with this change in the claim series.
No, I think yeah, that's what's coming. We may spread out the real project examples. I want to talk to Highway CC about that a little bit and try, and again, I know various people have reached out. We have our own issues. So if there are projects you're like, hey, I want to work through this, or this is what happened, what could have happened, send those to econ, I guess, econ@qrc.com, and we'll consider it and, work with Highway CC and see. But I think it'll be helpful for people. I know Marvin's asking for language, and it's really hard to have all these made up examples. So if we take, almost like a case study, and we can go through it and see, and also post those on the wiki as interpretations and examples for people to follow. So that's the thought on that real project example. So it may not be one class, it may be a series, and maybe, one per district or whatever. So we have our construction committee. We'll talk to the CEs about that as well.
So taking a real deep dive into some of these case studies, or as a case study, and walk through from start to finish on these examples. But Marvin has a question here. Contractor walked off the job, and I thought there was a disagreement indirectly. Maybe it should have been a directive by the resident engineer to proceed by field order and tracking work with worksheets with change order to follow if the worker cost could not be determined at the get-go.
Yeah, so all of that happened. They had a field order already, which is why they were in the field. Then they got a memo telling them, if you decide to leave, that's your means and methods, your volition. So, up to you, but we are not paying delay for you we're not paying for remobilization for you to come back to the site, and we're not counting this as delay. So we did the field order, we did the memo, and then we did a change order to create the force account item. So the disagreement really was in the field. Again, when you're in a force account situation, we can direct means and methods. And in this case, we were moving a water line, and I know we're out of time, so people can jump. I'll just finish explaining this. There was an unknown water line. The water line was not, the cover wasn't there. So in order to traverse the water line, we had to move the water line because Border Water Supply wouldn't entertain any solutions of us going over the water line. So we had to move the water line. So again, when I talk about ordering material, they were the ones producing the plans for Border Water Supply. We finally got Border Water Supply to say, yep, good plan, move forward. And then they were asking, well, what do we order? We're like, okay, if you want us to do your quantity takeoff, but you're the ones that produce the plan. This is a design build project as well. Yes. So, you know, the RE was there. We eventually did the change order with the force count, but we were disagreement on the force count value. And that is why the change order took so long. But the change order was executed, I think, the day before they moved, mobilized, or the day after. So not only did they have a field order and a memo, but they also had a change order that obligated them to do the work. And so, yes, their voluntary demobilization is like right now, what we're dealing with. So we'll see how it rolls out. We'll see what, obviously the CM team is kind of working with it. We're briefing the RE right now, and then it'll get elevated to C. But the contractor is adamant. There you go, Daryl. Those are the emails from yesterday. The adamant that they are entitled to delay cost when they demobilized. So our team is recommending no, and we will see what the RE says.
All right. Thanks,
At least
everybody.
it's not public shaming. At least it's not. Yes.
Okay, before we end this, I just wanted to include this. As we're wrapping up with the changes in claims. I mean, there's still a good amount to go through, obviously, but if there's any trainings that you would like for us to potentially help out with or do in office hours for, then please let us know. So with the theme of emailing econ, if you have any questions, if you would like any specific training, or if you think it would be useful for the group to have, then please let us know. Here are the things that are sort of coming up, and I mentioned briefly tracking documentation with correspondence and also issues. So please let us know. But if there are no other questions, we are over time. Sorry
Yeah.
about that.
And I think a lot of the CEs have been asking for the list that was just shown. I think this change in claims and this again, it may be an ongoing thing just to kind of work through examples and support the field. So anyway,
Yeah.
thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.